relatively quiet right now because we're speaking to so make sure you're bouncing on that. Let's get going. This one's early. Yep. Right, well, good evening and welcome to this candidate forum hosted by the Johnson County Post featuring candidates vying for Kansas Senate District 7. We'll give the candidates a chance to introduce themselves shortly. And we really do appreciate the crowd that's in the audience tonight because this is, who could have anticipated postseason baseball in Kansas City this year, but this is in conflict with the Royals' wild card playoff game. We do really appreciate both the candidates and the audience members here tonight as well as the staff. My name is Kyle Palmer. I'm the editor of the Johnson County Post. I'm honored to be the moderator for this forum and the two that will follow. We consider events like this our bread and butter. We've hosted such forums nearly every year since the Post's founding, nearly 15 years ago. They allow our readers and residents of Johnson County direct access to the people who would hold elected office and govern your communities. The Post prides itself on giving you fact-based, informative coverage of your local communities that you can't find anywhere else, and local elections are a perfect time to demonstrate that service to Johnson County. If you are a subscriber to the Post, I want to thank you. It's your support that allows us to put on events like this. We would not be able to do our annual election coverage without your ongoing support. Most of our revenue indeed comes from our more than 7,500 paying subscribers. If you do not currently subscribe but want to check us out and consider joining our growing community, go to johnsoncountypost.com and see what we're all about. A big thanks to Johnson County Library, who's co-sponsoring this event tonight at the new Merriam Plaza Library. Still has the new library smell here in Merriam. Opened up earlier this year, replaced the historic Antioch Library down the road. Johnson County Library this fall is helping us put on 8 nights of forums between now and when early voting starts on October 19th. Right? I said 18th last time, it's the 19th. And we want to thank the folks at the library for all their help and support. And we're also live streaming this event tonight, so if you're watching the Royals game right now, come back to us later. This will be here until up to and until the election, so that voters, residents of Johnson County can view this forum at any time as they prepare to make their vote. I also want to thank the candidates here tonight. Running for office is time-consuming and labor-intensive. You're seeking a position that will directly impact our readers, and we appreciate you giving some of your time so that voters can understand your positions on the important issues affecting this race. I've explained the format to the candidates, but just for the people online and in the audience, let's briefly lay out the format for this forum. This forum features candidates vying for Kansas Senate District 7. This covers the northeast corner of Johnson County. Actually not the area we're in right now in Merriam, but in cities like Fairway, Mission Hills, Mission Woods, Prairie Village, Roland Park, Westwood Hills, and then even some parts of Overland Park and Leewood. So that's this race in this forum. Tonight, each candidate will be given 1 minute to make a brief opening statement, and Dave will start just momentarily. Following that, we'll then ask a series of questions based in part on reader input. Each candidate will be given a chance to respond to those questions. We want to get through as many questions as possible, so we'll limit response times to between 1 minute and 90 seconds, depending on the question, but I'll make that clear before the question starts. Also, some of you seem to be well drilled in this. If you have an index card on your seat, you can write in a question, and Leah will go around and pick them up and pass them to me. And if we see any that we haven't gotten to, or there's some on the same theme, we'll ask those as well. If the candidate mentions their opponent by name in their response, or it's clear they're referencing the other candidate, we may give the other candidate a chance to respond for up to 30 seconds. That's done as a courtesy. After the questions at the end, again, depending on time, because we have 2 more forums after this, we may give the candidates a chance to make a brief closing statement. Again, for the candidates, Post reporter Leah Wonkum, she's in the room. She's going to be timekeeper, so she'll give you the deputy editor. I'm sorry, I need to update my script. The deputy editor. She'll give you a yellow folder. That's the sign for 30 seconds left in your response, and then the red means that your time is up. It's done as a courtesy. That's a warning to let you wrap your thoughts up. Also, just want to let the audience know Juliana Garcia is running the cameras, and Lucy Crispin is monitoring the live stream as well. So thank you for the Post staffers who are here tonight too. Well, with that, let's get going. Before we begin, the candidates flip the coin. Ethan Corson deferred, so Dave Danov, you will give your first opening statement. You'll each get a minute. So let's start with Dave Danov with opening statements.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm a retired division CEO from Seaboard Corporation, where I worked 35 years at Kansas City's only Fortune 500 company. My name is Dave Danov, and I look forward to representing you in the Kansas Senate. I decided to run because I became so frustrated with how both parties have moved to the extreme. I sincerely believe we benefit most when people focus on issues that matter. In walking the district, I hear daily that people want a moderate choice who's focused on their issues and not politics. Being that, the main thing that separates me from my opponent is he's a career politician and I'm not. I believe in responsible taxation and budgeting. I'm an advocate for the schools, and I believe that people should have the right to deal with their own daily lives without the influence of government. I appreciate your time and your support on November 5th.
That's Dave Danov, and we will give the microphone over now to Ethan Corson for his opening statement. Ethan.
Well, thank you, Kyle. Thank you to the Johnson County Post for putting on this forum, and to the Johnson County Library for letting us use this incredible new facility. I'm Ethan Corson, and for the past 4 years, I've had the incredible privilege of representing our community in the Kansas Senate. I'm also a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a practicing attorney, I'm a graduate of the Shawnee Mission School District, where the oldest of our 2 boys will be enrolled next year. When I first ran for the Kansas Senate, I promised to be open, accessible, and transparent. That's why I am so proud that this past Saturday, we held our 45th consecutive monthly town hall, one for every single month that I've been in office. It's also why so many of you have seen me on your doorstep, talked to me on the phone, or traded emails with me. Working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I've delivered on our key priorities for our district, from making sure that our public schools are fully funded, to helping pass over $2 billion in tax cuts, to fighting to preserve reproductive freedom. I've got a record of standing up for and delivering on our community's shared values.
Thank you to both gentlemen for your opening statements. Let's give you, consider it a warm-up question, but also an extension of your opening statements as well. You'll get 90 seconds each to respond to this, and the order will fall to Ethan first. We're holding forums for dozens of State House districts this fall. I've started each State House forum with this question. Specifying your district, Senate District 7 in Northeast Johnson County. What do you see as the biggest priority or need from residents in this district that you seek to represent? We'll start with Ethan Corson, 90 seconds.
Thank you, Kyle. So I think there are 4 issues that I've heard as I've been at the doors and at my town halls and talking to folks on the phone. The first is the need to reduce residential property taxes. We did a little bit of that in the tax bill that passed in the June special session. That was a real positive step forward. I think that we need to do more, and I hopefully will have a question specifically on taxes. I can talk to you about some of my ideas for that. The second issue is the full funding of our public schools and the need to fully fund special education, which continues to be underfunded now for almost, actually for over a decade now. We've not yet funded special education at the level that we need to. The third thing is reproductive rights. I continue to hear so much frustration from constituents feeling like after the August 2022 vote, when 79% of our district voted against the constitutional amendment, seeing that we had over 24 bills introduced in the Kansas Senate alone this past session to limit reproductive rights. Finally, an issue that I'm actually surprised at how many questions I get, but the issue of common sense gun safety. I talked to so many parents at the door about the need for us to enact common sense gun safety measures. This has really increased after the school shooting in Georgia, but it's been an issue really since I first started knocking on doors. The need to protect our students and to protect our communities.
Same question over to Dave Danov, the 7th Senate District in Northeast Johnson County. What do you see as the biggest priorities or needs that you hear from residents in this district?
Listen, in my walking the district, the thing I hear over and over again, and it's daily and frequent, it's property taxes. People have expressed concern how the property taxes have continued to go up. I get it. I've been a CPA, I've been a CFO. I understand why people don't understand that their property taxes are going up so much more than inflation. I think we should be focusing on property tax relief for Northeast Johnson County, whether it be limiting appraised value increases or perhaps providing some benefits toward those on fixed income as well as small business. I also believe that I would have supported House Bill 2036 It would have provided a bit more property tax relief for the residents of Northeast Johnson County, and also would have provided 6 additional months of sales tax relief on food for especially those in need.
Let's jump in, since both of you mentioned taxes in your opening answer, I will say, so just kind of lay out the order of events here. So the questions that we got the most via email when we asked readers what to ask candidates in the State House, the two topics that came up the most were voting / election integrity, if you want to call it that, and abortion. So we are going to get to those issues, but since you both mentioned taxes as kind of the top thing that you hear from residents, let's jump right into that issue. And so this will start with Dave Danov to begin with, and I'll ask each of you the same question, then might ask some follow-up questions after that. But you'll each get a minute in response to this question. So earlier this summer, lawmakers passed, and Kansas Governor Laura Kelly signed into law a tax cut package that slashes roughly $2.4 billion in property and income taxes. That law reduces state income tax brackets from 3 tiers to 2, eliminates the state tax and Social Security benefits, among other things. Still, taxes, particularly residential property taxes, remains a much asked about issue by our readers. So in addition to those other 2 topics, we've got a lot of questions about taxes. Also have one up here already from an audience member. Dave, you started to get into it a little bit, and the order falls to you, so you'll start here. Maybe you continue with this. Are there any other tax cuts or tax relief policies you'd like to see the legislature pursue next year if elected? In particular, is there anything the state can do regarding local property taxes? 60 seconds.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the property tax relief is very important. 2 examples I gave were potentially limiting the increase to the appraised value, as well as giving support to small business and those on fixed income with exemptions. I also believe there's an opportunity to index some of the tax brackets so that we don't have an inflationary increase in taxes as inflation increases people's income. I think the Kansas budget is in excellent shape. We have a strong ending balance, as well as our rainy day fund is fully funded, so I think there's an opportunity to do a little more on the tax side while still being responsible with our budget.
Same question over to Ethan Corson now. Are there any other tax cuts or tax relief policies you'd like to see the legislature pursue next year if, in your case, you're reelected in 2025? In particular, is there anything the state can or should do regarding local property taxes?
So I would have liked for there to be more residential property relief in the package that we passed during the special session. That was certainly something that I advocated for based off consistent feedback that I've received from constituents at the door at my monthly town halls. One of the things I would like to do in my second term is to increase the exemption from the state property tax from the first $75,000 in appraised value to the first $125,000 in appraised value. I have voted for bills previously that had that amount. That said, I do think we made really meaningful strides on tax reform. We completely eliminated taxes on Social Security for our seniors. That is going to be a big win that puts money in their pocket. On January 1st of 2025, the state will be going to 0 in terms of the state sales tax on groceries. That's another big win. For families, we doubled the child and dependent care tax credit. One bill that I'm really proud about, that I worked really hard on as a member of the Senate Tax Committee, where I'm going to be the ranking member next year, was a property tax freeze for our seniors that we need to expand.
A follow-up question for both of you. We'll start with Ethan. This comes from the kind of inspired by the audience, but also had one that I was ready to ask too. But someone in the audience asked, are you willing to trim any specific things from the budget to lower the tax burden on residents? And so I'll kind of add my gloss on it as well, because we do hear from readers who appreciate tax relief, but also want state services funded. So how do you balance the competing demands of residents wanting to see tax relief, but also wanting those state services to not be slashed too much? So if you do want more tax cuts or are looking for tax relief, what areas, if any, of the budget do you think could also be cut, if any?
Well, we definitely have a spending problem in Topeka. One of the things that's continued to frustrate me every budget cycle is the number of special projects that get inserted into the budget, oftentimes by lobbyists, at the behest of special interest groups. That is the first thing that we need to take a look at. We need to get rid of these provisos that come into the budget late in the process. Many of them aren't vetted. They don't go through the normal budgeting process. And we continue to add fat to the budget in the form of these various special projects for a certain legislator wants this thing in their district, another legislator wants this other thing in their district. I don't participate in that process because I think it's abusive and wrong, but I think that more of my colleagues should stop that. I think we need to look at just banning that process entirely, because the budget that we passed this past session actually had more spending in it than the budget that was proposed by our Democratic governor, Governor Kelly, in January. So there was more spending added to the budget by the Republican supermajority than was proposed by our common sense, middle of the road Democratic governor, and it's wrong, and we need to cut out those special projects.
Same question to Dave Danov. Is there anything, if you do want more tax cuts, or if you do want to pursue more tax relief, what areas, if any, of the budget do you think could also be cut accordingly?
Well, I would agree with Ethan. Special interest groups oftentimes try to pursue budgetary items that benefit them or their particular area. I agree that that's something that should be focused on in any budget. You start with a good budget in business. You don't generally add to the budget. When you're a businessman, you look for ways to trim. The one area where I think there could be some possibility for trimming is, some of these one-time expenditures, so they call, that seem to creep into the budget every year. So if we look at those that are in fact discretionary, those would be a good place to look for potential budget cuts also.
We did also get a lot of questions from readers. This would be the final tax question. We got a number of questions from readers asking specifically about tax relief for seniors. The state does already offer some property tax rebate programs for low-income and disabled seniors as well as veterans, but we do still hear frequently from our older readers living on fixed or retirement income worried about property taxes especially. Again, is there anything more the state can do to address this particular group of taxpayers? Order calls to Dave Danov, 60 seconds for each of you, addressing seniors and taxes.
Okay, I think the bill last year that provided exemption for Social Security for seniors was an excellent move by the legislature, and I certainly would have supported that. As I've mentioned before, I think there could be relief on property taxes for anybody on fixed income, which is very difficult for them, particularly given inflation.
Question to Ethan, anything that the state can do particularly more of regarding seniors and their worries about taxes?
So one of the bills that I'm proudest of in my work as a member of the Senate Tax Committee, where if I'm reelected, I'm going to be the ranking Democrat on the Senate Tax Committee, so I'm going to have a real leadership position in our state when it comes to influencing tax policy to benefit our community. But one bill that I worked really hard on, along with colleagues on both sides of the aisle, is existing law. It is a property tax freeze for our seniors. And what that law says is if you are 65 years or older, if the appraised value of your home is $350,000 or less, and your household income is $50,000 or less, the state will refund you any increase in your residential property taxes. I worked really hard to get that passed into law. I think it is an excellent program. What we need to do is we need to expand it so it covers more people in Johnson County. That's something that I worked really hard on last session. I wanted to lift the assessed value up to $595,000. I was able to get that passed out of the tax committee. I also wanted to get rid of the income limitation so more of our seniors could qualify. I'm also really proud that I sponsored a bill that became law that provided a sales tax exemption to our disabled veterans to honor and thank them for their service. So that's kind of leadership I've provided our community on the Senate Tax Committee.
We'll move on to a different topic. I would say I feel like I'm on the Star Trek Enterprise every time those doors open. If you can hear that on the live stream. Let's move to another topic. It was, I think, mentioned in your first answer, Ethan, but it was a question. We got some form of, probably the second most asked about topic we got from readers after we asked them to give us questions via email over the last month, and it is about abortion or reproductive rights. This will start with Ethan. 2 years ago, Kansas voters rejected a proposed amendment that would have explicitly stripped the right to abortion from the state constitution. It was seen as a major victory for abortion rights supporters, but debate about abortion has not stopped. In the 2 years since, Kansas lawmakers have debated dozens of bills seeking in some way to either limit or impact abortion procedures in Kansas, and it's widely expected that such measures will continue to come up next year if you're reelected in your case, Ethan Corson. I will have follow-up questions for both of you, depending on what you answer in the first question, but the first question is this. Do you support any new restrictions on abortion or laws in any way governing the procedure? Why or why not? 60 seconds.
So I'm proud to be the only candidate in this race endorsed by Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes because they know that I have a long record of supporting reproductive rights. As a member of the Kansas Senate, I voted against putting the amendment to ban abortion on the ballot because I don't think we should be putting fundamental rights up for a popular vote in this state. But when it was clear that the amendment was going to be on the ballot, My wife and I joined with Kansans for Constitutional Freedom at their Canvas Kickoff event, and we personally knocked on hundreds of doors in the summer of 2022 leading up to that August 2022 vote. And to be clear, I wasn't just canvassing as your state senator. I was canvassing as much as a parent who doesn't want to see the next generation of Kansans grow up with fewer rights than my generation did. I actually think we need to be going the other way. In my second term, I want to put into place protections for IVF, so Kansas women who will know that if they want to have access to assisted reproductive technology, if they want to start and grow their family, that they will be able to utilize
Follow-up
that.
question to you, and then we'll get to Dave Danov for the question I just asked, but follow-up question for you. We do hear from some readers opposed to abortion say that there is a compelling state interest in protecting unborn life. Moves to do that, moves to do things like allocating funding for pregnancy resource centers that promote alternatives to abortion, which the Kansas legislature has done. They see these as ways to give women safety and support during pregnancy and childbirth. Your response to the idea that such laws do not infringe on the right of abortion, but actually make women safer?
I think that abortion is already incredibly regulated in the state of Kansas. I think we need to keep that procedure safe. We need to expand access to things like contraception, expand access to things like IVF. I do not support new restrictions on abortion in the state of Kansas.
Question over to Dave Danov. The original question I asked, do you support any new restrictions on abortion laws in any way governing the procedure that have been, of the likes that have been debated in the State House the past couple of years since the 2022 vote? Why or why not?
I support the existing Kansas law on women's reproductive rights. I do not support any new laws, administrative or whatever, that would make it more difficult for a woman to get an abortion. It's an extremely emotional decision already that shouldn't be burdened by government. It should be up to her family, and her doctors, and no one else.
Fair enough. A follow-up question for you is, I think some readers see this as a matter of trusting women and their doctors to make personal private decisions. As you just said, they see any moves to restrict abortion access to be invasive and also against the spirit of the 2022 vote. I will say, as a Republican, you will invariably face pressure to maybe vote for or support any types of these types of measures that may come up if you are elected. How do you respond to that sentiment and that idea?
I'm resolute on that matter. I am a pro-believer in the woman's right to choose, and that's where I stand on the issue.
Final question on this topic for both of you. Actually, Ethan kind of mentioned it in his first answer, but I'll ask the follow-up question for both of you, and we'll start with Dave. Tied up with this issue of abortion, for some readers are concerns about the state regulating other areas of reproductive health, namely in vitro fertilization and contraception. Would you support any measures at the State House that would aim to control Kansans' access to either of these? And that's to Dave first.
No, again, consistent with my prior view, I think that is an issue between a woman and her doctor, and we do not need state government interference in personal decisions like that.
And question over to you, Ethan, you kind of already answered it, but maybe give you a chance maybe to expound a little bit. Seeing any legislative moves to either restrict IVF or contraception, how would you react if re-elected?
Well, I can tell you not only how I'd react if I was re-elected, I can tell you what I've done, which is I have spoken out passionately and authoritatively on the Kansas Senate floor about this issue. There was an attempt last session to enact a fetal personhood amendment that would have put access to IVF in jeopardy, and I spoke out against it on the Kansas Senate, and I urge my colleagues to vote against it. So I think a key difference for me is I don't just vote no on these issues. I should take a leadership role, and I speak out for the 79% of our constituents who want to have access to reproductive care, and I fight for them every single day in the Kansas Senate as a leader in the caucus.
Let's move on to another issue, public education, education funding, K-12 education. In recent years, Kansas lawmakers have debated measures that would in some way or another allow taxpayer funds to go to students and families not enrolled in public schools, including a proposed voucher program, I believe it was last year, and then earlier this year, tax credits for families in private and parochial schools. Such measures could very well come up again next year or something like them. If elected or re-elected, would you support measures that would allow the use of taxpayer dollars to go to individuals enrolled in private or religious schools? Why or why not? And the order goes to Ethan Corson first, 60 seconds.
So I just came from a PTA meeting at Rushton Elementary, which is a beautiful new school in the Shawnee Mission District. So these issues are really fresh on my mind. I'm a graduate of the Shawnee Mission School District. Our oldest son will be starting kindergarten in the Shawnee Mission School District next year. And I think that one of the most important things that I can do as your state senator is make sure our schools have the resources that they need so the next generation of students has even more opportunities than I did. So I've been in the trenches for the last 4 years fighting against voucher programs and fighting for public education. I'm the only candidate in this race with any endorsements from any pro-public education groups. I've been endorsed by the Kansas chapter of the National Education Association, the Kansas chapter of the American Federation of Teachers, Education First Shawnee Mission, and Game On for Kansas Schools. I oppose school vouchers in all forms. Our constituents have made it crystal clear to me that when they pay taxes to the state of Kansas, they want their money going to fund our Kansas public schools, not private schools in Missouri.
Dave, Dan, I have a question to you. If elected, would you support measures that would allow the use of taxpayer dollars to go to individuals enrolled in private or religious schools? Why or why not?
Listen, I'm a public school advocate. My children all went to Shawnee Mission School District. I've been a supporter of the Shawnee Mission Education Foundation. I believe the public schools are the fabric of a community. It's the most important government institution we have. I, for that reason, would not support school vouchers. I believe that the funds that the taxpayers pay are part of supporting our community, and they should not be diverted to private schools.
Follow-up question regarding education for both of you is more broadly addressing education funding. Governor Laura Kelly has boasted for 6 consecutive years that K-12 education in Kansas is fully funded, in her words. A funding bill passed this year also boosts funding for special education, maybe not quite to the level that the state board recommended, but still does boost special education funding after a long debate about that. The funding situation appears to be remedied enough that the Kansas Supreme Court is no longer overseeing the funding process, as it has been since the Gannon case. Current funding formula, I believe, lasts through 2027. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but going into next year, what do you see as the biggest priorities or remaining challenges for K-12 school funding, and how would you want to address that as a legislator? And we'll start with Dave Danov, 60 seconds. Biggest challenges facing education funding.
Thank you. I believe the biggest issues with the schools and right now is number of teachers, access to teachers, trying to get teachers to enter the profession. They have a weak pension program. Compensation needs to be adequate for them to become a teacher. Also concerned that the resources made available to teachers is inadequate. I can't understand why a teacher may need to go buy their own supplies for their classroom. So like I said, I'm a public school advocate, and I think we need to support the teachers in the legislature.
Ethan Corson, the question to you, any big challenges, remaining challenges or priorities you see for K-12 school funding going into 2025 if re-elected?
I think the biggest challenge is the shortfall in special education. We were able to get $75 million in one-time funds added last legislative session. That was a win, but that does not take us nearly to where we need to be in terms of funding special education at the level that it needs to be. I've talked to the Shawnee Mission School District about this. Every single school year, they take out about $13.1 million out of their general fund that is meant to benefit all kids, and have to move that over to cover special education expenditures that they should be being reimbursed for by the state according to law, but they're not being able to get those reimbursements. $13.1 million, that is a shortfall that affects every single student, whether or not you utilize special education services. Across all of our Johnson County districts, Blue Valley, Olathe, all the others, it is $85 million a year that is being taken out of general fund and put in to special education, and we're not getting those reimbursements. You mentioned that we are going to need to reauthorize the school funding formula. That is going to be a real challenge because of the number of anti-public education legislators, and we need champions like me in the legislature who will fight to get that full funding reauthorized.
Final question about education does come from the audience, a slightly different topic. This will start with Ethan. What is your position on funding early childhood education in Kansas? What more can the state do? 60 seconds.
We need to do a lot more on this. This is a huge issue. We know that the years 0 to 4 are just critical for child development and putting them on a pathway to be successful. I supported the governor's effort to create an office of early childhood where we would centralize all of the early childhood services into one cabinet level agency. Right now we have nearly a dozen different state agencies that touch on various aspects of early childhood. I'm also committed to making sure that we have more access to quality, safe childcare for any family that wants it. This is a huge issue in our state. Right now, we are meeting only about 46% of the demand for childcare in the state of Kansas. We need to increase the number of seats. We need to have programs that allow these childcare providers to expand. We need to make sure that we can bring in and keep workers. We need to work to raise their wages. Right now, a childcare worker in Kansas is making about $11 an hour. So many of them are leaving the profession because they can make more money working at Target or doing something else. And so we need to keep them in. We need to increase the number of slots and make sure that it's enriching and safe.
Dave Danov, the question from the audience, what is your position on funding early childhood education in Kansas? What would that look like for you?
Yes, I think early education is a very important period of development for our children. I would be very supportive of programs that would support such. Getting access to teachers is important. Getting the facilities available is very important. I would, in fact, be supportive of such funding.
Let's ask another question from the audience, not really on any particular topic, but something that I've also been noticing, so it's an apropos question. We'll start with Dave Danov to begin. This is what the questioner in the audience writes. I don't see much of a difference between the candidates on their questions so far, so why are you running? This person asks. How do you differ from your opponent? So let's get down and dirty, okay?
Amen.
How do you differ from your opponent? And so we'll start with Dave Danov first, 60 seconds.
Well, I'm not a career politician. I come from corporate world. I have a lot of real world experience. I've run a multi-billion-dollar multinational company. I've traveled to 70 countries. I've had operational responsibility for 30 countries. I know the grain business well. I know manufacturing. I know trade. I know retail operations. And these are experiences that I have that I think can bring value to the citizens of Johnson County. You know, taxation, budgeting, trade, government relations, finance, personnel, just anything that's that I've learned from my corporate world. And like I said before, I'm not a career politician. I have no desire to be one. I don't want to be beholden to party politics. I want to do what's right for the people and the citizens of Northeast Johnson County, focused on issues.
Question to you, Ethan. Why are you running, and how do you see yourself different from your opponent?
So I ran for the Senate for a really clear reason. I wanted to bring a new generation of leadership to the state of Kansas and the Kansas Senate. I'm the youngest member of my caucus. I'm the only member of my caucus with young children who's going through things like childcare and navigating our public school system and having two working parents and things like that. So I clearly bring the new generation of leadership to the state of Kansas. When I ran, the average age in the Kansas Senate was approaching 70. And I thought that we needed new and different and diverse perspectives that were more reflective of Johnson County, more reflective of the experiences of so many people in our community. As far as what are the differences between me and my opponent, you know, it's important to know that regardless of what my opponent said, he is endorsed by the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. That is a very extreme Koch brothers funded organization. They are the largest single donor to his campaign, and they have three priorities that everybody should know about. One, they want to enact a flat tax in Kansas that would devastate our budget, devastate our school funding, provide no relief to the middle class. They oppose Medicaid expansion, and they support school vouchers. None of those priorities align with the constituents in District 7.
We'll give Dave Danov a chance just to respond to that particular point about your endorsement, and as well as the policies that that organization supports that might bear on you if elected.
Listen, yes, I'm aware I was endorsed by and supported by the Chamber. I met with them, described them exactly who I am and what I stand for. I think they appreciated my business knowledge and what that could mean in the legislature, and I therefore am happy to have gotten their endorsement.
Let's do a couple more issues before we get to closing statements, and so we'll go to the next issue, which has been asked about a couple times from the audience, and I had a prepared question as well, so we'll kind of combine them here. And the order falls to Ethan, so you'll go first on this one. This question directly from a reader, so I'll quote, quote, in Kansas, the rate of gun deaths increased 32% from 2012 to 2021, and the rate of gun suicides increased 14%, and gun homicides increased 102%. End quote. I'll say that's the data from the advocacy group Every Town for Gun Safety. The reader goes on, quote, "It is evident that we need to do something in Kansas to curb these growing numbers." That's that reader's opinion. I'll stop there and ask my question. Is there any piece of gun-related legislation you would support that you think would address the issues that this reader brings up, gun deaths, rising gun injuries, why or why not, Ethan Corson?
So I'm proud that I've been endorsed in both of my campaigns by Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. I'm the only candidate in this race with that distinction. This is an issue I hear about continually when I'm out knocking doors. And as a parent, I will never forget the time when I was talking to our oldest son, who was at that time 4 years old, about his day at pre-kindergarten. And he described for me what was an active shooter drill that they did that day. He talked to me about how they were taught about if a bad guy comes into the school, you want to be quiet like ninjas, and you want to listen to the teacher. And as a parent, you just sit there thinking, how did we get to this place? Is this how we want to live as Kansans? So there are so many common sense things that we could do to increase gun safety. The place to start is with safe storage laws. 26 states have them. The majority of states, Kansas needs to join them. We also need to improve our background check system. It's one of the most common sense ways of keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And I'm also proud that I co-sponsored a red flag law to keep guns out of the hands of convicted domestic abusers or people that a judge thinks is at risk of harming themselves.
We'll give Dave Danov a chance to answer the question I just asked, but just a follow-up question from the audience for you, Ethan, since you brought up gun restrictions or gun safety measures, as you put it, as this reader puts it. This reader asked, didn't you also swear to uphold the same Constitution which the state we shall not infringe on the human right to arms? So I think getting to the point that some residents, some constituents really do feel strongly about the Second Amendment, and do these measures infringe on that right?
So I strongly support the ability of law-abiding Kansans to keep and bear arms. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I don't think that anything that I've suggested is contrary to that. I think these are really just common sense provisions that if you ask Kansans, over 80% of them support these common sense things that we can do to keep our schools and our communities safer. Something like a red flag law that provides plenty of due process, requires findings by a judge. Something like limiting the age. One of the things I voted against lowering the age at which a child, because they are children, could carry a concealed loaded weapon. I voted against lowering that age from 21 to 18. Again, I don't think that these things at all infringe on the right of law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms, and that's a right that I strongly support and will continue to do so. The
question then to Dave Danov, the original question I asked is, again, based on some of the statistics that the previous reader cited, is there any piece of gun-related legislation you would support that you think would address the issues of rising gun deaths and injuries in Kansas? Why or why not?
Listen, I'm a strong believer in the U.S. Constitution, and I support the Second Amendment. I've never been a gun owner, nor do I have a desire to own a gun. I do believe in reasonable safety laws related to guns. Things such as training of minors, similar to how we have hunters who have to be trained on weapons, and reasonable background checks on gun procurement.
And then a specific question from the audience, just to follow up for you, Dave Danov. You did just mention background checks, but also this audience member wants to know, are you in support of such things as red flag laws or safe gun storage laws? I'll ask you that specifically, Dave Danov.
Well, I would need to understand the specific legislation to make sure that it wasn't infringing on people's personal rights. I do believe that we need to ensure that the existing gun laws are enforced and therefore provide the tools to the law enforcement to enforce those unlawful possession and use laws.
Maybe continuing on the same theme a little bit, another question from the audience I'll give to both of you, and we'll start with Dave, that's where the order goes. This audience member writes, I keep getting mail about how crime is on the rise, I think referencing election mailers. I've seen Kansas Bureau of Investigation stats that show crime is much lower. He specifically cites Prairie Village, but I think you could also say the same thing about Johnson County in general. Then in the U.S., what would you suggest that the legislature do to promote public safety in the community? Is there anything that the state can do regarding local crime trends in public safety? Let's start with Dave Danov first.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. You said said Prairie Village was?
Well, this particular reader cited Prairie Village, but we can talk about Northeast Johnson County in general. She cites mailers that she's gotten that say that crime is on the rise, so she says also that KBI stats say that crime is much lower in this area than in other parts of the U.S. So I guess the question, though, is there anything the legislature can do to promote public safety in the local community?
Well, I think people are concerned about crime. I mean, we've seen it, that crime is mobile. We've had incidents unfortunately in Fairway where we lost a police officer. You look on next door and people are always complaining about crime. I think the most important thing we can do is support our law enforcement and prosecutors to give them the tools and resources to be able to enforce the laws and ensure that people who are incarcerated are held there and yeah.
And then the question over to Ethan Corson, then anything the state legislature can or should do to promote or support public safety in the local communities of Northeast Johnson County?
Yeah, so I know that safe neighborhoods are really important to having a vibrant community. I'm the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and in that capacity, I have the real privilege of working really closely with our district and county attorneys and working with our law enforcement community. I've worked with them on bills to do things like increase funding for and modernize the Kansas Bureau of Investigations. I've worked with them on and supported bills to crack down on fentanyl. I've worked with and supported bills to increase criminal penalties in a number of areas, like stiffer penalties for felons who illegally possess a firearm that they're prohibited from carrying, and then they use that firearm to commit a new crime. I've supported even the creation of new crimes to deal with emerging threats, like the creation of a crime penalizing organized retail theft. So I've always listened to our law enforcement community. And just last session, there was a proposal on civil asset forfeiture that I think went too far in taking away what I believe is an important tool for our local law enforcement. I was one of only 2 people and the only member of my party in the Senate that voted against that because, again, I think that it went too far. We were ultimately able to get a compromise that I did support, but I've always worked closely with law enforcement. I appreciate the support of the Northeast Johnson County cities that also valued their law enforcement.
Final question, and I think just because of the time, we are going to forego closing statements, just as we want to get as many issues in as possible. And it really was the most asked about or emailed question that we got, so I would be remiss if I didn't at least ask it to end things here. So elections in recent years in Kansas, as well as in Johnson County, have gone off without a hitch, according to both state and local election officials. That may be why many readers express bewilderment. Some, you could say, even umbrage at the continued suggestion that problems with local elections are possibly leading to either widespread voter fraud, miscounts, other issues impacting the final results. Many readers still seem to take candidates' views on election integrity as a litmus test of sorts. So, do you trust Kansas election systems, and if elected, would you seek to put any new limits or rules around voting in Kansas? This will be the final question, and we'll start with Ethan Corson, 60 seconds.
So we are so lucky in Johnson County to have truly safe, secure elections. I think that Secretary Schwab has done a great job in his role as Secretary of State of making sure that we have well-running, well-functioning elections. I think Fred Sherman is a national treasure running the Johnson County election office. So I have absolute trust and faith in the elections, both here and across the state. I also want to thank the folks that volunteer who work as poll workers in our election and voting locations. Those folks do an amazing job. So I know that the question was about new restrictions. Again, this is an area where I've shown leadership for our community. I think that we actually need to be going the other way. So what I've done in the Kansas Senate was I sponsored a bill to actually join with the dozens of other states that allow same-day voter registration, because that's something we don't have in Kansas that we need. I sponsored a bill to allow 16-year-olds to register to vote when they get their driver's license, and then they would automatically be placed on the voting rolls when they turn 18. I sponsored a bill to expand the number of days that we have for early voting.
And then Dave Danov, the question to you, do you trust Kansas election systems? And if elected, would you seek to put any new limits or rules around voting in Kansas? And this is the last word for you. 60 seconds.
Yes, I do trust Kansas election system. I think we have a great mix of voter access through early voting and mail-in voting. I also think we have a good balance of fraud prevention for our elections in Kansas. My only concern is that I think not enough people vote. We have a particular problem with turnout, primarily during the primaries, but also it'd be great if we could encourage everybody to vote in all elections. Thank you.
Well, thank you to the candidates in Senate District 7 so much. For the audience in here, give them a round of applause for participating in the forum.